The smell of Savannah, Georgia, is something you never truly get out of your skin. It's a mix of salt air from the coast, blooming jasmine, and the heavy, sweet scent of slow-cooked brisket. For Janice Whites, that smell was the scent of home. A sturdy two-story Victorian house on Victory Drive that she and her husband Otis had spent 35 years turning into a sanctuary. Janice was a woman of stature. At 68, she carried herself with the kind of practiced grace you only get from 30 years of managing a high-stakes branch of a federal bank. Her hair was a crown of natural silver coils, always perfectly coiffed. Her hands, though beginning to show the faint maps of age, were always manicured. She was the woman the neighborhood came to when they needed a loan, a prayer, or the secret to the perfect peach cobbler. But in the spring of 2024, the sanctuary felt like a tomb. Otis had been gone for 6 months. A sudden heart attack while he was tending to his prized rose bushes. The roses were still there, blooming in defiant shades of crimson, but the man who loved them was a memory trapped in silver-framed photographs. The silence in the house was a physical weight. Janice would sit in the kitchen, the heart of their home, clutching a mug of tea, watching the dust motes dance in the Georgia sun. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like Otis's footsteps. Every ring of the telephone made her heart skip, hoping it was him, before the cold reality settled back into her bones. Her sister Pearl called every morning from Atlanta. "Janice May, you can't keep rattling around that big old house like a ghost." Pearl's voice would crackle over the line, sharp and honest. "You're 68, not 100. You need life around you. You need noise. You need your people." "I have my people, Pearl," Janice would reply, her voice steady but thin. "I have Otis's roses. I have the church choir on Sundays. I'm fine." "Fine is a lie we tell ourselves when we're too tired to fix the truth," Pearl countered. "Think about what Marcus said. Think about those babies." Marcus, her only son, was her pride and joy. She had worked double shifts at the bank to put him through Georgia Tech. He was a software engineer now, living the American dream in a shiny suburb of Columbus, Ohio. He had married Sloan, a woman Janice respected but never quite understood. Sloan was new money, all branding, marketing, and curated Instagram posts. She was professional, polished, and as cold as a Savannah winter. Then came the call in late April. "Ma," Marcus's voice sounded thick with emotion. "I can't sleep at night knowing you're down there alone. What if you fall? What if you get sick? We have so much space here. Sloan and I have been talking. We want you with us. The kids miss their Nana. They need your influence, Ma. They need to know where they come from." That was the hook. Not her safety, but the children. Tyson, 8, and Maya, 5. They were Janice's heart walking around outside her body. Sloan joined the call, her voice smooth as silk. "Janice, we've been looking at houses. We found this beautiful place in Westerville. It has a garden suite, a fully finished basement with its own entrance, a kitchenette, and a view of the woods. You'd have your privacy, but you'd be right downstairs. We'd be a family again." Janice looked around her kitchen. She looked at the height marks penciled onto the pantry door from when Marcus was a boy. She looked at the empty chair where Otis used to sit and read the Savannah Morning News. "The market is at an all-time high, Ma," Marcus added, the pragmatism of a son showing through. "You sell that house now, you'll be set for life. You won't have to worry about a roof leaking or a lawn needing mowing ever again. Just come be a grandma. Let us take care of you for a change." For the first time in months, Janice felt a flicker of something other than grief. She felt wanted. She didn't decide that day. She prayed on it. She walked through the rooms of her life, touching the wallpaper, smelling the cedar closets. She thought about the harsh Ohio winters versus the humid Georgia heat. But then she looked at a video Sloan sent. Little Maya trying to make Nana's biscuits and getting flour all over her nose, asking, "When is Nana coming?" The decision was made. The sale of the Victory Drive house was bittersweet. It went for $450,000, all cash, to a young couple who promised to keep the rose bushes. After paying off the tiny remaining mortgage and closing costs, Janice sat with a check that represented 35 years of her and Otis's sweat and sacrifice. She felt rich, not just in money, but in possibility. She was Janice Whites, the matriarch, moving north to claim her throne in the hearts of her grandchildren. As she pulled out of the driveway for the last time, her SUV packed with only her most precious belongings, she glanced in the rearview mirror. She didn't see the ghost of Otis. She saw a woman starting a new chapter. She didn't know yet that in the state of Ohio, the garden suite was just a fancy word for a basement. And she didn't know that to Sloan, Janice wasn't just a mother. She was a financial strategy. The drive from Savannah to Columbus took nearly 12 hours. As Janice crossed the Ohio border, the landscape shifted from the moss-draped live oaks of the South to endless rows of corn and gray industrial skylines. A chill ran down her spine, not just from the northern air, but from the sudden, nagging instinct of a woman who had spent her life managing risk. The new house in Westerville was a monument to modern architecture. Sharp angles, glass walls, and a palette of sterile grays and whites. It looked like a page from a high-end magazine, not a home where children tracked in mud or a kitchen smelled like slow-cooked Sunday gravy. "Nana's here!" Tyson and Maya burst through the front door, nearly knocking Janice over. In that moment, the exhaustion of the road and the lingering doubts vanished. Janice knelt on the cold hardwood, pulling the children into her arms, inhaling the scent of their hair, the only warmth she had truly craved since Otis passed. Marcus hugged his mother tight. His breath hitched with a relief that felt almost heavy, as if he were finally setting down a burden he'd been carrying for miles. Sloan stood at the threshold in expensive athleisure, a green juice in one hand and a smartphone in the other. She offered a smile that Janice, with her 30 years in banking, recognized instantly. It was the customer relationship manager's smile. Polished, practiced, and transactional. "Janice, your suite is all set. We decorated it exactly how we thought you'd like," Sloan said, leading her down a set of pristine stairs to the basement. The garden suite was, in reality, a beautifully finished cellar. It was modern and clean, but it was underground. The windows were high, narrow slits near the ceiling that offered only a thin gray sliver of the Ohio sky. Compared to her sun-drenched Victorian in Savannah, it felt like a luxury bunker. "What do you think, Ma?" Marcus asked, his eyes searching hers for approval. Janice looked at her son, at the dark circles under his eyes and the subtle tremor in his hands, and she forced a smile. "It's very quiet, baby. I'll appreciate the privacy." The first week was a dream. Janice brought the soul of Savannah into that sterile house. She fried chicken in seasoned flour, simmered butter beans, and baked cornbread that turned the kitchen into a sanctuary. The house, usually smelling of Sloan's expensive eucalyptus and rain candles, now hummed with the scent of heritage. But by Friday night, the honeymoon phase hit a wall. Janice was in the upstairs living room with Marcus and Sloan, looking over paperwork for the new, even larger house they were closing on in a more exclusive zip code. "The down payment is coming in a bit higher than the projections," Sloan sighed, setting her tablet on the marble coffee table. She didn't look at Marcus. She looked directly at Janice. "Columbus real estate is aggressive right now. We're about $50,000 short of the threshold needed to hit the best interest rate. If we don't hit it, the monthly carry will be tight. It might affect Tyson's private tutoring." The silence in the room was deafening. Janice knew that look. She had seen it 1,000 times from behind her mahogany desk at the bank. It was a pitch. Marcus stared at his shoes, mumbling, "Sloan, I told you we could just wait on the upgrades." "Wait and lose the house, Marcus?" Sloan's voice was thin and sharp. "Janice, we aren't asking for a handout. But if you see this as an investment in the children's legacy, we'd consider it your buy-in to the family." Janice Whites wasn't impulsive with money. Every cent she had was the result of Otis's overtime and her careful ledger-keeping. But she looked at her son, her only boy, looking so defeated under the weight of his wife's ambition. She thought about being a part of the family. "I'll give you the $50,000, Janice said softly. "But it's not an investment. It's a gift. I want my grandbabies in the best home possible." Sloan was on her feet in a second, wrapping Janice in the tightest hug she'd given yet. "You are a lifesaver, Janice. A literal lifesaver." Janice smiled, but her gut twisted. A golden rule of banking echoed in her head. Never lend more than you can afford to lose, and never mistake a transaction for a hug. The next morning, Janice passed Marcus's home office. The door was ajar. "Yeah, it's handled. My mom covered the gap. No, don't run the credit check again yet. We have the cash," Marcus was saying, his voice frantic, hushed. Janice paused. Her eyes fell on a pile of envelopes on the hall table. One was from a debt collection agency addressed to Marcus Whites. It was marked Final Notice. Twist 1. Marcus wasn't a success story. He was drowning. The $50,000 wasn't for a dream house. It was a bandage on a bleeding wound of credit card debt and bad decisions that Sloane was desperately trying to hide. Janice retreated to her basement suite, her heart hammering against her ribs. She looked up at that tiny gray window. She had just handed over a massive chunk of her life savings to a son who couldn't tell her the truth and a daughter-in-law who saw her as a bank. The move to the new Westerville estate happened in a whirlwind of bubble wrap and expensive moving trucks. This house was a fortress of glass and steel, even grander than the last, perched on a hill that overlooked a manicured valley. Janice's new garden suite was objectively larger. It had a private walkout patio. Nyungnam kamjak lang leo kumodhum chuada. By June, the honeymoon was officially over. The air in the house had changed. It started with the family dashboard. Sloane had installed a giant digital touchscreen in the kitchen. Every family member had a color-coded lane. Janice's name was in a bright, demanding orange. 7 a.m. Prep kids breakfast. Sloane insisted on organic kale smoothies and crustless quiche. 8:15 a.m. School drop-off for Tyson's Young Engineers Camp. 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Light housekeeping, laundry, and grocery procurement. 3 p.m. Pickup and transport to Maya's elite gymnastics. 6 p.m. Dinner prep. Recipes provided by Sloane via a shared app. Janice looked at the screen, her brow furrowed. Sloane, honey, I thought I moved here to be a grandma, not a logistics manager for a mid-sized corporation. Sloane didn't look up from her MacBook. Janice, we're a unit now. My promotion track at the agency requires 12-hour days. Marcus is buried in back-end code. This is how we keep the ship sailing. Besides, you're so much better with the kids than some random nanny we'd have to pay $30 an hour. It was a compliment wrapped in a barbed wire command. Then came the financial adjustments. It happened over a Sunday dinner, a meal Janice had paid for entirely because Sloane forgot her wallet at the Whole Foods checkout. The utility bills for this estate are astronomical, Sloane remarked, poking at her quinoa. The square footage alone, and the HVAC has to run double time for the basement level since it doesn't circulate as well. Marcus, didn't you say the electric bill jumped $400 since your mom moved in? Marcus looked pained, staring into his water glass. Sloane, it's a 5,000 square foot house. It's not just Mom. But Mom uses the industrial washer and dryer during peak hours, Sloane countered smoothly, her voice like velvet-covered gravel. Janice, would you mind contributing about $500 a month, just to cover the Janice-specific overhead? It'll help Marcus breathe a little easier with the mortgage. Janice felt a prickle of heat behind her ears. She thought about the $50,000 gift currently keeping their credit score afloat. She thought about the $1,500 she'd spent the previous week on back-to-school clothes and Maya's specialized violin lessons. I suppose I can do that, Janice said, her voice tight. I want to carry my weight. Twist 2, the cultural erasure. The real blow, the one that drew blood, came a week later. Janice was in the kitchen, the air thick with the glorious, savory scent of her slow-simmered collard greens and smoked turkey tails. It was a recipe that had survived the Middle Passage, the Jim Crow South, and the Great Migration. Sloane walked in and visibly recoiled, covering her nose with her designer sleeve. Oh my God! Janice, what is that? Aroma? Is something burning? Janice bristled, wooden spoon in hand. That's dinner, Sloane. It's soul food. It's heritage. It's heavy, Janice. The oils are going to seep into the custom cabinetry, and the kids are on a strict Mediterranean paleo track. We really need to keep the ethnic cooking to a minimum in the main kitchen. Maybe you could just make your special food once a month? Or use the hot plate in your kitchenette downstairs? Janice looked at the pot of greens, the food that had nourished Marcus's father and his father before him, and felt like a ghost in her own family. She realized Sloane wasn't just managing the house. She was sanitizing Janice out of it. By the end of the month, the Janice-specific expenses had grown. $500 for utilities, $600 for the shared grocery account. Janice was now paying nearly $1,100 a month to live in a basement where she wasn't allowed to cook her own food, all while providing 50 hours a week of free labor. That night, Janice sat on her small patio, the heavy Ohio humidity pressing down on her silver hair. She pulled out a small black ledger, the one she used for federal bank audits back in Savannah. She wrote a single line. Initial outlay, $50,000. Monthly burn, $1,100 plus 200 hours unpaid labor. ROI, 0. She looked at the numbers. They didn't lie. She wasn't a matriarch. She was a subsidized servant who was paying for the privilege of working. "Otis," she whispered to the dark woods, "I think I've walked into a trap." July in Ohio was a different kind of heat than Georgia. It didn't have the soul of the coast. It was just stagnant and heavy. But the atmosphere inside the Westerville house was even more suffocating. The family dashboard had become a digital taskmaster. Janice found herself running a 3-man household while Sloan networked, and Marcus stayed buried in his basement office, avoiding the growing friction between his wife and his mother. The breaking point arrived in the form of a summer solstice garden party. Sloan was gunning for a senior VP position at her firm, and she decided to host the city's elite. For 3 days, Janice was run ragged. She prepped artisanal appetizers, polished silver she'd never seen used, and organized the floral arrangements. She assumed, naturally, that as the matriarch of the family, she would be co-hosting. "Janice, honey," Sloan said on the morning of the party, handing her a small, tan fabric envelope. "I got you something special for tonight. Since you'll be helping out with the kids and the catering staff, I thought this would look professional." Janice opened the envelope. Inside was a crisp, white linen apron with a small embroidered logo of the catering company Sloan had hired to supplement the help. Janice stared at it. "Sloan, I am the grandmother. I have my own silk dress for tonight." "Oh, Janice, it's just for the flow of the evening," Sloan said, not meeting her eyes. "The VP's coming tonight. They're very traditional. They might get confused if you're mingling while the kids are running around. It just makes things cleaner. You understand, right?" Janice didn't say a word. She took the apron. The banker in her was recording everything. The backyard was a sea of white linen suits and overpriced Chardonnay. Janice spent the first 2 hours in the kitchen, plating miniature crab cakes and keeping Tyson and Maya from underfoot. Around 8 p.m., she stepped out onto the patio to refill a tray of drinks. She saw Sloan standing with a group of high-powered executives. One woman, a sharp-eyed donor for the local arts council, looked at Janice and then back at Sloan. "Sloan, darling, your service is impeccable," the woman remarked. "Where did you find such a dedicated woman? She has such a dignified air." Sloan laughed, that high, tinkling marketing laugh. "Oh, that's Janice. She's our live-in domestic coordinator. We were so lucky to find her. She's practically one of the family. She handles the kids and the heavy lifting so Marcus and I can focus on the high-level stuff." The word domestic coordinator hit Janice like a slap to the face. Not mother, not grandmother, not even Marcus's mom. Janice stood frozen, the tray of drinks trembling slightly in her hands. She looked at Marcus. He was standing 3 feet away, a beer in his hand, hearing every word. He looked at his mother, then looked at his boss, and then he looked away. He said nothing. He didn't correct her. He didn't claim her. Janice set the tray down on a nearby table, not with a crash, but with a terrifying, silent precision. She walked back to the kitchen, took off the white linen apron, and folded it into a perfect square. She didn't cry. Janice Whites didn't cry when the bank was being audited, and she wouldn't cry now. She went down to her basement suite and opened her black ledger. Her hand was steady as she wrote, "July 21st, denied kinship in public, reclassified as domestic coordinator. Cost of dignity, priceless. Status, the audit begins. Twist 3, the contract." The next morning, the house was a mess of empty bottles and discarded napkins. Sloan walked into the kitchen where Janice was already cleaning. Sloan didn't apologize. Instead, she placed a 3-page document on the counter. "Janice, after last night I realized we need more structure," Sloan said, her voice flat. "I've drawn up a formal residential contribution agreement. Given the market rate for a suite like yours in Westerville, plus the utilities and the premium groceries, we're looking at $1,500 a month in addition to your current help. It's for tax purposes, really, and to make sure everyone feels fair." Janice looked at the paper. Then she looked at Sloan. "Fair?" Janice asked softly. "Fair," Sloan repeated. "If you can't agree to it, we might have to list the suite on Airbnb to cover the mortgage. We have to be practical, Janice. This is Ohio, not the South. We don't live on handshakes here." Janice picked up the pen, but she didn't sign. She tapped it against her chin. "I'll need a few days to run the numbers, Sloan. After all, I was a manager for 30 years. I never sign anything without a full audit." The war was no longer cold. It was officially a hostile takeover. Janice sat in her basement suite that night, the residential contribution agreement glowing under the dim lamp on her bedside table. The silence of the house above her was deafening. No footsteps from Marcus coming down to apologize. No giggles from the grandchildren. Just the hum of the high-efficiency HVAC system she was now being asked to pay $1,500 a month to maintain. She didn't cry. She opened her laptop, the same one she had used to balance the books for the Savannah Federal Branch for 3 decades. "You want a contract, Sloan?" Janice whispered to the empty room. "Then let's look at the ledger." Twist 4, the deep audit. Janice began to pull every digital receipt, every bank statement, and every family dashboard log she had saved. As a former manager, she had a habit of archiving everything. She started a spreadsheet. Column A, cash outlay, the $50,000 gift, the utility contributions, the grocery shares. Column B, tangible goods, the furniture she bought for the kids, the $1,200 soccer gear, the organic vitamins. Column C, market rate services. This was where her eyes narrowed. She looked up the average cost of a private, live-in nanny/domestic coordinator in Westerville, Ohio. The rate was $35 an hour for 2 children. She calculated her hours. 7 a.m. to 8 p.m., 6 days a week. That was 78 hours a week. At overtime rates, anything over 40 hours, the number was staggering. By the time she finished at 3 a.m., the math was clear. In the 14 months she had lived there, Janice Whites had provided over $140,000 in value to the household. The $1,500 rent Sloan was demanding was a drop in the bucket compared to what the couple actually owed her. The next morning, Janice waited until Sloan and Marcus had left for work. She dialed a familiar number. "Pearl? It's Janice May." "About time," Pearl's voice boomed from Atlanta. "I saw the pictures of that garden party on Sloan's Instagram. You looked like you were working a shift at a country club, Janice. Why were you wearing an apron in your own son's house?" "I was a domestic coordinator, Pearl," Janice said, her voice dropping an octave into her professional bank manager tone. "But the audit is in progress. I need you to do something for me. I need the name of that realtor you used when you moved to the condo in Buckhead. I need someone who knows the Columbus market, and I need them to be discreet." "Now you're talking," Pearl laughed. "Don't let them take your spirit, sister. You're a Whites. We don't bow, we build." For the next 3 days, Janice played the part perfectly. She was quiet, efficient, and compliant. She didn't argue about the contract. She simply told Sloan she was consulting her financial advisor. While Sloan was at her high-level branding summit, Janice met with a realtor named Elena. They didn't meet at the house. They met at a quiet bistro 10 miles away. "I have $380,000 left from the sale of my Savannah home," Janice told Elena, sliding a folder across the table. "I want a 2-bedroom condo, top floor, high ceilings, somewhere with a view of the water, even if it's just a pond. And I want it within 15 minutes of my grandchildren, but nowhere near my son's zip code." Elena looked at the folder, then at the regal woman sitting across from her. "We can find that by the end of the week, Ms. Whites. Cash buyers are kings in this market." "Good," Janice said, taking a slow sip of her tea. "Because I'm tired of living in a basement." That evening, Janice returned to the house. She found Marcus in the kitchen, staring at the family dashboard. He looked exhausted, his shirt wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot. "Ma," he started, his voice cracking. "About the contract. Sloan just thinks it'll help with the taxes. She doesn't mean anything by it." Janice walked over and placed a hand on his cheek. She saw the boy she had raised, but she also saw the man who had let her become a servant. "Marcus," she said softly, "do you remember what your father used to say about debt?" Marcus looked away. "He said if you can't see the exit sign, you're already trapped." "That's right," Janice said, her voice turning as hard as flint. "And honey, I just found the exit." She walked past him, leaving him standing in the cold glow of the digital screen. She had her condo. She had her audit. Now, all she needed was the right moment to present the final bill. The Friday night air in Westerville was thick with the scent of a brewing storm. Inside the house, the atmosphere was even heavier. Sloan had been hovering all week, her residential contribution agreement still sitting unsigned on Janice's nightstand. She wanted her $1,500. She wanted her victory. "Dinner is served," Janice called out from the kitchen. She had prepared a meal that was a silent message. A perfectly roasted chicken, seasoned with the herbs Otis used to grow, and a side of garlic mashed potatoes. It was the last free meal she would ever cook in this house. As Marcus and Sloane sat down, Sloane was already checking her Apple Watch. "Janice, the dinner smells lovely. Did you have a chance to look at the paperwork? Our accountant needs the first contribution by Monday to balance the Q3 household projections." Janice didn't sit down. She remained standing at the head of the table, her posture as straight as a marble pillar. "I did more than look at it, Sloane," Janice said, her voice calm and resonant, the voice she used when she had to deny a $1 million loan to a shady developer. "I performed a comprehensive audit. Marcus, put your fork down. You'll want to hear this." Janice reached into the pocket of her silk cardigan and pulled out a slim, leather-bound folder. She laid it on the table, sliding it toward Sloane. "What is this?" Sloane asked, her brow arching. "That is an itemized invoice for services rendered and capital injected," Janice said. Sloane opened the folder and let out a short, mocking laugh. "Janice, what on earth?" "Read the first line, Sloane," Janice interrupted. $50,000, cash gift for the down payment of this house. Line 2, 18 months of utility subsidies at $400 a month. Line 3, grocery contributions. Line 4, childcare. Janice stepped closer to the table. "I looked up the market rate for a specialized live-in domestic coordinator in this zip code. For 2 children, including transportation and educational support, the rate is $35 an hour. I've worked an average of 78 hours a week since I arrived. That's 40 hours at base pay and 38 hours at time and a half." Sloane's face went from pale to a blotchy, furious red. "You're charging your own son for being a grandmother? That is pathological, Janice." "No, Sloane," Janice replied, her voice dropping an octave. "Pathological is charging your mother-in-law rent for a basement after she gave you her life savings. Pathological is calling her the help at a garden party because you're embarrassed of her heritage." Marcus looked like he wanted to vanish into the floorboards. "Ma, please." "No, Marcus. Silence is what got us here," Janice said, looking her son directly in the eye. "The total value I have provided to this household in 18 months, including the initial cash gift and market rate labor, is $142,600. She tapped the folder. "If you want me to sign a lease for $1,500 a month, I am happy to do so. However, I expect this balance of my $142,000 to be credited against that rent. By my calculations, I won't owe you a single penny for the next 8 years." The room went silent. Even the hum of the refrigerator seemed to die down. Sloane opened her mouth to speak, but for once the marketing genius had no slogan. "And there's one more thing," Janice continued, her voice softening but regaining its edge. "I've already spoken to my attorney. Since the $50,000 gift was given under the verbal agreement that this was my forever home, and you have now breached that agreement by demanding rent, I am filing a claim for the return of the principal plus interest." "You can't do that," Sloane hissed. "It was a gift." "In Savannah, maybe," Janice smiled thinly. "But as you said, Sloane, this is Ohio. We don't live on handshakes here. We live on contracts. And I have the bank statements to prove where every cent came from." Janice turned to Marcus. "I love you, son, but I didn't raise a man who hides behind a spreadsheet while his mother is being erased. I'm moving out on Thursday." "Moving out?" Marcus gasped. "To where? You don't have a house?" Janice picked up her tea. "I'm moving to a 2-bedroom condo in Dublin. It has a view of the pond, 12-foot ceilings, and most importantly, Marcus. It has a lock on the door that I own. Cash purchase. Closing is in 48 hours. Janice turned and walked toward the basement stairs. At the top step, she paused. "Dinner was on me tonight, Sloane," she said without looking back. "But starting tomorrow, you're going to need to find a new domestic coordinator. I hear the going rate is $40 an hour if you want someone who actually likes your kids." She disappeared down the stairs, leaving the heavy, expensive house in a silence that felt like a debt finally come due. The Sunday following the Great Reckoning was the quietest day the Westerville house had ever known. No gospel music drifted up from the basement. No scent of baking soda or vanilla. Janice was packing. Upstairs, the family dashboard was flashing red. Sloane sat at the kitchen island, 3 different spreadsheets open on her laptop. Her professional veneer was cracking. Without Janice to handle the 7 a.m. breakfast rush, the laundry, and the school drop-offs, the house was descending into a state of high-priced chaos. "Marcus, we have a problem," Sloane hissed, her voice vibrating with stress. "I just called 4 elite nanny agencies. To get someone with Janice's coverage on such short notice, it's going to cost us $6,000 a month, minimum, and that doesn't include the grocery runs or the housekeeping." Marcus was sitting at the table, staring at a cold cup of coffee. He looked smaller than he had 48 hours ago. "Then maybe we shouldn't have tried to charge my mother $1,500 for a basement, Sloane." "I was trying to save our equity," Sloane snapped. "We are over-leveraged, Marcus. This house, the cars, the private tutors, it was all built on the assumption that your mother's cash and labor were permanent assets." "She's a person, Sloane. She's my mother. And she's a White's," Marcus said, his voice finally finding a bit of the iron Janice had raised him with. "You treated her like a line item on a balance sheet. Well, the line item just walked out." Marcus stood up and threw a manila envelope onto the counter. "And while we're talking about audits, I checked the joint savings. You didn't just use her $50,000 for the down payment. You used it to bridge the gap on your credit card debt from that branding retreat in Tulum. You lied to me, Sloane. You didn't want her rent to help the family. You wanted it to hide your own spending." Sloane went silent, her eyes darting to the floor. The marketing genius had run out of spin. Downstairs, Janice was folding her last silk scarf into a vintage suitcase. There was a knock on the door, a soft, hesitant one. It was Tyson and Maya. "Nana, are you going back to Savannah?" Tyson asked, his lower lip trembling. Janice sat on the edge of the bed and pulled them both into a hug. This was the only part that hurt. "No, babies. Nana is moving to a beautiful new place just 15 minutes away. It has a pool and a balcony where we can see the ducks in the pond." "Why can't you stay here?" Maya whispered. Janice looked at the basement walls, the garden suite that had felt like a cage. "Because Nana needs to be a Nana again. Not a coordinator, not a tenant, just your Nana." She handed them each a small, hand-painted stone she had brought from Otis's garden in Georgia. "You keep these, and whenever you look at them, you remember that Nana's house is always open for you. No dashboards, no schedules, just cookies and stories." As the professional movers, whom Janice paid for herself in cash, loaded the last of her belongings, she walked through the kitchen one last time. Sloane didn't look up from her screen. She was already interviewing a candidate on Zoom, her voice regaining that fake, bright HR tone. Marcus stood by the door, his eyes red. "Ma," he whispered as she passed. "I'm sorry. I should have stood up. I should have been a man." Janice paused. She adjusted his collar, just as she had on his graduation day. "A man doesn't just say he's sorry, Marcus. A man fixes what he broke. You have a lot of fixing to do in this house, but you're going to have to do it without my bank account." She walked out the door and into the bright Ohio sun. She didn't look back at the glass fortress. She looked toward Dublin, toward the second floor, the high ceilings, and the view of the water. For the first time in 18 months, Janice White's could breathe. The condo in Dublin, Ohio was everything the garden suite was not. It was on the second floor, with vaulted ceilings that invited the morning sun to dance across the hardwood floors. There was a balcony overlooking a small willow-fringed pond where a family of ducks glided in rhythmic circles. Janice sat on that balcony, a cup of real, slow-brewed coffee in her hand. No kale smoothies, no digital dashboards, just the sound of the wind in the trees and the rustle of the Savannah Morning News, which she still had delivered digitally every day. She had spent the first week in a state of decompression. She went to the grocery store and bought exactly what she wanted: heavy cream, real butter, and a rack of ribs she intended to slow roast until the meat fell off the bone. While Janice was finding her rhythm, the Westerville fortress was crumbling. Without Janice's $1,100 monthly contribution and her 60-plus hours of free labor, the financial cracks Sloane had tried to paper over became craters. The elite nanny Sloane hired lasted exactly 10 days before quitting, citing unrealistic expectations in a hostile work environment. Sloane was forced to take a sabbatical from her firm to manage the household, a move that effectively killed her chances for the senior VP promotion she had coveted. 10 days after moving out, Janice's attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Mrs. Montgomery, sent a formal demand for restitution to Marcus and Sloane. Janice sat in Mrs. Montgomery's office, looking at a stack of documents. "They're offering a settlement," Mrs. Montgomery said, pushing a paper across the desk. They can't pay back the full $50,000 in cash. They don't have it. But they are willing to sign a promissory note for $30,000 secured against the equity of the house. And they're dropping any claim to back rent or utility fees. Janice looked at the numbers. She knew Marcus's salary. She knew their mortgage. She knew that even this settlement would hurt them. I don't want the interest, Janice said softly. Just the principal. And I want a clause in there that says Tyson and Maya are allowed to spend every Wednesday and every other weekend with me. No interference from Sloan. No logistics meetings. Just family time. You're being generous, Janice, the lawyer remarked. After what they did? I'm not being generous, Mrs. Montgomery. I'm being a banker, Janice replied, her eyes clear and sharp. I'm settling a bad debt so I can focus on my high-value assets. Those babies are my assets. The rest is just paper. Wednesday arrived, and with it, a silver SUV pulled into the condo parking lot. Marcus stepped out, looking 10 years older. He looked at the beautiful brick building, the well-kept grounds, and the Janice White's name on the directory. He brought the kids up. When the door opened, the scent of cinnamon and slow-cooked pot roast hit them like a warm hug. Nana! Maya screamed, running into the living room. You have a real kitchen, and it smells like home. Janice hugged them, her heart finally feeling whole. She looked at Marcus, who was standing awkwardly in the doorway. You want a plate, son? Janice asked. Marcus looked around the airy, sun-filled room. He saw the photos of Otis on the mantel. He saw the peace on his mother's face, a peace he hadn't seen since they left Georgia. I can't, Ma. Sloan is waiting. We have a meeting with a debt counselor at 6. Janice nodded slowly. She didn't gloat. She didn't say I told you so. She just adjusted his collar, a habit she couldn't quit. Then go fix what's yours, Marcus. But remember what I told you. You can't build a palace on a foundation of lies. It'll sink every time. As Marcus walked away, Janice closed the door. She didn't lock it because she was afraid. She locked it because she was the only one with the key. October in Dublin, Ohio, brought a crispness to the air that reminded Janice of the high-altitude winters she'd read about as a girl. But inside her condo, the heat was set to a perfect 72 degrees, and the only dashboard in her kitchen was a handwritten recipe card for sweet potato pie. The ducks on the pond had begun their southern migration. Janice watched them from her balcony, wrapped in a thick wool pashmina that Pearl had sent from Atlanta. The news from the Westerville house arrived in fragments. Marcus called every Tuesday evening. His voice was steadier now, though stripped of the youthful arrogance he'd worn when he first convinced her to move. The exclusive estate was back on the market. They were downsizing to a modest townhouse, something they could actually afford on Marcus's salary alone. Sloan had taken a mid-level position at a different firm, her sabbatical having turned into a permanent exit from the high-flyer track. The marriage was in reconstruction, Marcus said. No more branding retreats, no more status symbol cars, just a budget and a lot of hard conversations. Janice listened, her banker's heart noting the restructuring plan, but her mother's heart simply hoping for his peace. On a golden Wednesday afternoon, Tyson and Maya sat at Janice's granite island, their fingers stained with flour. Nana, why didn't Mommy like this smell? Maya asked, sniffing a jar of nutmeg. It smells like a hug. Janice paused, her hands kneading a soft ball of dough. She looked at her grandchildren, the high-value assets she had fought so hard to keep in her ledger. Sometimes, baby, people get so busy looking at what's new and shiny that they forget what's real and solid, Janice said softly. They think heritage is a burden, but heritage is the root. And without roots, the wind will blow you over the minute things get tough. Tyson looked up from his homework. Like the house in Westerville? Daddy said we had to move because the foundation was too expensive to keep up. Janice smiled, a small, knowing smile. Something like that, Tyson. Something like that. That evening, after Marcus had picked up the children, Janice sat at her desk. She opened the small black ledger for the very last time. She turned to the final page. She didn't write about the $50,000. She didn't write about the $1,500 rent or the domestic coordinator apron. Instead, she wrote a final summary for her own soul. Audit title, The Ohio Transition. Initial investment, $50,000 and 18 months of blind faith. Losses incurred, 1 garden suite, several illusions about filial gratitude, and a white linen apron. Assets recovered, 100% of self-respect, unfiltered access to the next generation, a home with a view of the water and a door that locks from the inside. Closing statement. Love is not a transaction, but it must have a floor. Being a grandmother is a gift. Being a servant is a choice. Janice Whites picked up her fountain pen and drew a thick double line under the entry, the universal banking symbol for a closed account. She closed the book and placed it in the bottom drawer of her mahogany desk, right next to Otis's old watch. She walked to her balcony and looked out at the pond. The sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the Ohio sky in shades of Savannah orange and deep Georgia purple. She picked up her phone. There was a text from Pearl. "You coming down for Thanksgiving, or do I have to bring the greens to Dublin?" Janice smiled. She typed back, "Bring the greens, Pearl, but I'm cooking the turkey, in my own kitchen, on my own time." Janice Whites put her phone down. She didn't check for notifications. She didn't look at a dashboard. She simply sat in the silence of her own making, a woman who had finally balanced the only ledger that ever truly mattered. The audit was over. The matriarch was home.